morning, everyone. I'm pleased to have this opportunity this morning to talk with Professor Paul Butler, the Albert Brick Professor in Law at our Law Center. And Paul, I appreciate you taking the time to share your reflections with us. It's terrific to have this time together with you. Paul, as many of the members of our community may know, prior to your time as a professor, you served as a federal prosecutor with the Department of Justice. Can you share a little bit about your journey from this role to your current work as a member of our faculty?
Of course, and first, President, let me thank you for having me on here. It's an honor to be on this program with you. The University has always been so supportive of my work, starting with the top. So I really appreciate all of the support that you've shown for these issues over the year, President. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul.
I came to the Academy from a career as a federal prosecutor. For part of my time, I was detailed to the local prosecutor's office in the District of Columbia. And there I had experiences that changed both my life and my career. What led me from being a prosecutor to the Academy were two events. One, kind of an intellectual dawning, the other, a big dramatic thing. The intellectual piece was understanding that the work that I was doing from day to day as a local prosecutor, doing drug cases, petty crimes in the District of Columbia, wasn't helping the community in the way that I'd hoped. I was actually a baby prosecutor, along with our dean at the law school now, and we were detailed to do misdemeanor prosecutions in the District of Columbia. And if you go to criminal court in DC, then and now, and then, this is in the late 1980s, early 1990s, and now, you would think that white people don't commit crimes. You would think that white folks don't get into fights, they don't use drugs, they don't steal. They are utterly absent from the criminal court in the District of Columbia, even though white folks are about half of the population of DC. But Black folks, Hispanic folks, man, those are some bad dudes. That's the impression that going to a criminal court in DC provides. And that wasn't consistent with my life experience or my experience is with this, or my experiences with the citizens of the District of Columbia. And so I became very concerned about the racial aspects of my work and ultimately concluded I didn't go to college, I didn't go to law school, I wasn't paying back all this money and loans to put Black people in prison, or brown people, or poor people. And that was pretty much all I was doing. It took a while to come to that conclusion, and it was advanced by the big dramatic thing that happened. I graduated from working on local prosecutions in the District of Columbia to doing public corruption with the Department of Justice in the public integrity section. And I was working on the biggest case in the section. I was the junior prosecutor on a team that was going after a United States senator for public corruption. And while I was working on that case, I got arrested and prosecuted for a crime that I didn't commit. And Jack, my joke is, I always say, I don't want to say what happened because I want people to buy my book, Let's Get Free. That's my first book where I tell the story of what happened. But it was a silly little dispute about a parking space, a misdemeanor crime. Someone had said I'd run up to her and pushed her, which just wasn't true. But when the police rolled up, all they saw was a young Black man, which is what I was at that time. And that seemed like all they needed to arrest me. People say, well, didn't you tell him? Did you tell him that you were a prosecutor? I did. And the cop said, so you probably already know this. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. And again, I tell the story of how everything worked out in that first book, Let's Get Free. But Mr. President, I'll give you a hint. Things worked out fine for me. And the reason things worked out fine for me is because I had the best lawyer in town, a former public defender named Michelle Roberts, who did an amazing job. Things worked out fine for me because I had skills, legal skills. Jack, I had literally prosecuted people in the courtroom where I was being prosecuted. Things worked out fine for me because I had a certain kind of privilege. We made sure that the jury knew things like the fancy schools that I attended, the fancy job I had as a prosecutor that should not have been relevant, but actually do make a difference. And then the final reason things worked out fine for me is because I was innocent. But I didn't think that that was the most important reason. I think I would rather have been guilty and have Michelle Roberts as my lawyer than been innocent and had some under-resourced attorney who couldn't fight my case in the way that it needed. And so after that, I also realized I couldn't continue to do that work.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Thanks for sharing that with us. Now, you mentioned your first book. Your most recent book is Chokehold, Policing Black Men. It was named a Kirkus Review's Best Book of 2017, as well as a Washington Post Notable Book of that year. And its discussion of the policing of Black men has only become more urgent since its release. When you discuss that book now with audiences or with students, what do you consider to be its most important takeaways? What reflections do you have on the book now, 3 years later?
You know, when the book came out about 3 years ago, it was right after all the attention had appropriately been paid to the Trayvon Martin case and to cases like Michael Brown, who was killed by the police in Ferguson, and Eric Garner, who was killed by the police in Staten Island. And the publisher said to me, the sad thing about the book and the good thing about the book is that it will always be relevant, that it will always be in the news. And that's certainly turned out to be true, as the whole world has seen after this national reckoning on race and all of the protests inspired by the police killing of George Floyd. So I've continued to discuss these issues. You know, it's funny because what I've thought recently is what's very relevant to this moment is the book originally was published during the transition from President Obama to President Trump. And in the foreword, I said, the police didn't treat people any better when President Obama was in office. And so I don't think that there's a reason to think that the police will treat people differently now that President Trump is in office. What's going on, the concern, the chokehold is the metaphor that I use in the book. It is bigger than any one president. And so it's certainly the case that the Trump administration had different civil rights enforcement strategies and values than the Obama administration did. And so some ways that the Obama administration, in my view, stepped up, or the Trump administration stepped back. But the reality is that in the United States, the police kill about 1,000 people each year. And that's been consistent for as long as we've had the data, regardless of who the president is. And so for folks who didn't like President Trump's approach and are now excited and hopeful about what President-elect Biden will do. Again, I think the message of the last 10 years is, again, these issues are larger than one single national leader. It doesn't mean that that person can't make a difference. She or he can make a huge difference. But part of why I wrote the book was to help people understand we need to think more transformatively about the change that our criminal legal process needs.
As a former prosecutor, you're able to offer particular insights into our criminal justice system. This August, you shared a video of the opening statement that you would have given if you were prosecuting the case of Breonna Taylor. Can you share more about that opening statement and what you think we should consider when it comes to seeking justice in this case?
Sure. So just so everyone knows, a lot of people know her name. I think people may not be as familiar with the facts of the case. And a very brief summary is that she was a 26-year-old first responder in Kentucky and never had any involvement with criminal activity. Nobody, including the prosecutors, think that she did. She dated a guy who prosecutors were investigating, and they'd gotten a tip, unreliable that it turns out, that he sent some drugs to her house through Federal Express. And they got this warrant to enter the house in the middle of the night to look for drugs, which again had no connection to Breonna herself. And when they did this no-knock warrant at 12:30 in the morning, Breonna had come home from working the late shift, and she and her boyfriend were curled up in bed. They drifted out to sleep, and they heard this loud knocking on the door. It was actually a no-knock warrant, so the cops didn't have to knock. But what they did was, worst of all, they knocked, but they didn't identify themselves as officers. So, Jack, I think anybody who's sleeping 12:30 in the morning, you hear this knock, it would freak me out. And her boyfriend had a legal gun. He was licensed to carry it. They walked towards the door. Who is it? Who is it? There's no answer. And all of a sudden, the door breaks down. The cops had used a battering ram. They didn't identify themselves as officers. The boyfriend shoots a warning shot that hits one of the officers in the leg. And then those cops just let loose. They fired away in that apartment. One officer was standing outside. He was firing through a closed patio door. He couldn't even see where he was shooting. They shot up all 8 rooms in that apartment, the apartment next door as well. And they killed Breonna. She got caught. She got shot 5 or 6 times. Her boyfriend wasn't touched, even though he was the threat to the officers. And appropriately, the case, after a few months, when it seemed like the police and prosecutors weren't going to do anything, got public attention. And I say appropriately, but one thing that's different and important about this case is that a lot of the attention about police and police brutality is focused on African-American men. Breonna Taylor was an African-American woman. And while they are also disproportionately targets of police violence, their cases don't get the same amount of attention. Fortunately, this case did. Activists, scholars, lawyers, human rights workers all rallied around justice for Breonna, which seemed very slow in coming. And so in August, working with the great professionals at the law school, our communications team, and our incredible media folks, we put together this video where I do a very short opening statement. And I don't want to sound brash, Jack, but I wanted to show the Kentucky prosecutor how to do his job. I wanted to send the message that every day, every week, you charge people with homicide in your jurisdiction. And to the extent that any of those prosecutions are justified, then you should certainly consider homicide charges against the officers who killed Breonna Taylor. So that was in August. Again, thanks to our great communications team at the law school, the video of my opening statement went viral. And so it got a lot of attention. And ultimately, however, the prosecutor announced that he was not bringing charges against any of the officers for killing Breonna Taylor. He did bring relatively minor charges against that one officer who was almost literally shooting blind. And those charges have to do with not Breonna's apartment, but the apartment next door, which the officer shot into, endangering the 3 people who lived there, including a young child. And so that's what the officer is being charged with. And so again, what unfortunately we get used to in doing social justice work is that we're in it for the long haul, and it's a war as opposed to a battle, because we don't win all of the battles. And just in terms of equal justice under the law, I think it's so important that when police officers commit crimes, they be held to the same standard as any other citizen. And that's what it means to live in a democracy. And I'm disappointed that that's not what's happening in the Breonna Taylor case.
Thank you. Now, you recently taken on a new responsibility. You were named a contributing opinion columnist for the Washington Post with a focus on criminal justice and race. What motivated you to take on this new project? And can you talk about your approach to your column? How do you select the particular issues you want to focus on?
So I find that being a public intellectual, which is a fancy way of saying that I like to explain my scholarship and my activism in ways that everybody can understand. Our great dean at the law school might not like it to hear me say this, but the fact is that nobody reads law review articles, or very few people do. We law professors do, but to the extent that a lot of important work is done in scholarship, I think it's just as important to get that work out to the people who could most benefit from it. Always think of a poem by Audre Lorde that starts out, "Poetry is not a luxury." And Audre Lorde always described herself as a Black woman, feminist, lesbian. And I think for those communities, her understanding was that poetry was vital. It's part of the way that people survive. And I think the same thing is true for good scholarship, that it's not a luxury, it's vital, especially for communities that have been shut out of resources and justice. And so the way that I ensure that my scholarship isn't only in the ivory tower is to try to have a public presence as well. And again, I can't say enough about how effective the communications team at the university and the law school is to help all of us get out our work. You know, some people might say that my work has a particular political take, which could be fair. Our school's a big tent. Even at the law school, we've got people on different sides. And I've noticed and been gratified that our communications team is not really focused on the politics or the message, just wanting all of us to translate our ideas to the broader world, which I think is also consistent with our mission and our values as a university. And so when the Washington Post said, Paul, you've been doing a bunch of op-eds for us on policing issues. We've been dating. How about going steady? I was like, it's on and popping. I grew up reading the Washington Post and the New York Times. My first job out of college was working for a think tank here in DC called the Joint Center for Political Studies. And my first boss as a professional, a semi-professional, told me the first thing you need to do every morning is to read the Washington Post and the New York Times. And I've done that for the next 30 years. And so the idea that I've got this presence in the paper of note, that I have this opportunity to get the word out about the issues that are important to me in as august a forum as the Washington Post is just an incredible opportunity.
Oh, well, congratulations on that new responsibility.
Thank you.
Now, this has been a challenging year for our community, in particular for our young people, as they seek to respond to the challenges of this moment and identify ways in which they can lead and be of service. What advice do you hope to give? What advice are you giving to our current law students or who are hoping to be a part of a movement for justice?
To go for it, and that you can. A lot of the attention has focused on policing, but I've been inspired, as many of our students and colleagues have been, by the movement for Black lives. And the way that the movement diagnoses the issue is that it's about white supremacy and it's about patriarchy. And that we might be able to work on the police. We might be able to, in some sense, fix mass incarceration, but that's like treating the symptom rather than the disease. So even if we're able to fix the criminal legal process, then the disease will just metastasize, as it did in this view, from slavery to the old Jim Crow to the new Jim Crow. And so while certainly the movement is interested in reforms to make the police treat everybody with fairness and respect, it's just as interested in issues like economic opportunities for everybody, in ways of making sure that all members of our communities, our women, our LGBT members, people of all ages and backgrounds, that they're all lifted up and served by the law and policy in ways that they're not served now. And the reason why I think that's inspiring for our students is, you know, I'm a criminal law professor, and I'd love it if everybody wanted to go into criminal law, but that's not the case. And for our students at the law school who are interested in corporate law, in human rights law, and international law, whatever they're interested in, there's room for them in this movement. There's room for folks who want to do economic development. There's room for folks who want to do intellectual property. Again, the need in our communities is vast. The talent in our Georgetown students is vast. And so there's a fit for folks if you want to do criminal law stuff, can recommend a range of approaches. If you want to go work for a law firm, I can recommend things in your corporate practice, in your pro bono, all about, again, creating opportunities and using your legal gifts, your skills, your talents that we've both developed and honed at the law school to do justice.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. And thank you for taking the time for this conversation. Deeply grateful to you. In closing, is there a message you'd like to share with our community?
You know, what I often wonder is, back in the day, how I would have responded to other moments when there's been vast inequality. So I think, well, what if I've been born an enslaved person? And what I hope, President, is that I would have been a runaway. I hope that I would have been one of those enslaved people who led uprisings. But the reality is, that's not what most enslaved people did. And then when I think about the civil rights movement, I hope that like my mother, I would have marched with Martin and taken it to the streets with Malcolm. And the reality is, that's not what most folks did, including most Black and brown folks. In the movement now, the expression is, if you want to know what you would have done back in the day, ask yourself, what are you doing right now? And when I ask myself that question, that's a moment when I'm particularly proud to be a member of the Georgetown community. I think that our commitment to social justice, our ethos of being women and men for others, is entirely consistent with the activism that I see on racial justice at the university. And again, I think it starts with the top. So thank you again, Mr. President, for your leadership on these issues. There's been, of course, appropriate attention paid to the descendants of the enslaved people who are responsible for us being here now. And should there be more done? Yes. I think that we're on the right track. And when I look at our amazing law students and how involved they are in the movement for Black lives, in environmental justice and economic justice, when I look at the work of my amazing colleagues on the faculty and staff, I think that our school is particularly suited for this movement. That the cliche is, it's not a moment, it's a movement. It's a movement for racial justice, economic justice, gender justice, social justice. And I'm proud to be part of a university that is helping make this moment of national reckoning on race a real movement.
Thank you. Thank you. Paul, thank you so much for taking this time to be here with us. And I remain deeply grateful to you for the expertise, the insight that you bring to our community and that you share with all of our members. And I look forward to being with all of you again soon. Take care of yourselves and take care of everyone around you, for every Hoya, everywhere.